So we are continuing, with the application development, and this is actually a good time to finish this application because Field Target, is completely, the season is over until next March. So I have a few months to actually polish and get this done. Now there was a few questions related to. I know I sound funny because I just had gum surgery on Friday. They found that the gum tissue surrounding one of my teeth is pre-cancerous. In other words, it has the possibility to develop into pre-cancerous cells, which in return has a possibility again to develop into cancerous cells. So my oral surgeon was very careful when she told me about the news, because some people just freak out whenever they hear the word cancer, and even though this is like completely at least maybe 5-10 years before it can have a chance to develop develop into actual cancer cells. So anyway, she took out a piece using biopsy. She took out as much as she could without receding the gum line too much, and guess what, in a few months it just grew back. It just grew back. And so she said, okay, we need to refer you to is it called a periodontist? Someone who actually do gum surgery. So on Friday, they cut off a big chunk out of surrounding my teeth, but they cannot leave my teeth exposed without. I need a bigger pile. So they need to cut out more, but they cannot leave my teeth exposed without the gum around it, because otherwise teeth would actually fall out. So they cut off a portion out of my palate and grafted it around my teeth, and so it's a little bit swollen, it's a little bit sore, not too much, not too bad. I was expecting much worse in this. So, but I will sound a little bit funny today because of that. It's not because of the surgery, actually. It's because of an appliance. They gave me a quote-unquote appliance that is just basically a shield that I put on on my palate, so that the donor site, the site where they cut off a piece, is now quote-unquote protected. So that's why I'm gonna sound a little funny, and I think the microphone may help. So I'll give it a try. Certain sounds, just doesn't come out right. It won't come out right. But I'm projecting I'll be healing up sufficiently by Thanksgiving, so I won't be missing anything. That's kind of important. Well, I really only like the desserts, and most dessert is not crunchy or has a parts that I cannot chew. Alright, so let's go ahead and see. I don't think it's working yet. There we go. No, not yet. Okay, I think that's better. Too loud? Just about right? Okay, great. Okay, so we got a few interesting questions right before the class today. Like on the splash screen or somewhere else. How do we include like video content, or how do we include a document that is relatively long? Because you can use a text label for a lot of stuff, but you probably don't want to use it for like a full documentation of something. It's just a lot of typing. So what we'll do is we'll just give it a try today and find out how we can do something like that. What I'll do is I will go to my apps.losreals.edu account. Now you can do the same thing because you guys have accounts over there as well. In fact, your accounts are better than mine because I'm an employee here. I cannot use Gmail, okay? But I can use the resources that I need to use here for this particular demonstration. And that is Google Sites, okay? Google Sites is included, and so all of you have access to Google Sites through apps.losreals.edu. So I'm going to go into Google Sites, and what I'll do is I'm going to create a new site here, and the new site is just going to be called using the same name as my application. So I'll call it FT Scorer, which is the ongoing program that I've been developing, kind of like to show you the process of how to develop an application. So I'm going to create this site here, and I can either use, I can go through the gallery and find out which one is better to use. They don't have anything. They do have a lot of interesting sites here, but I'm going to cancel it and just use a blank template instead. At this point, you also have a chance. Let me just magnify the screen first. At this point, you have a chance to change the quote-unquote name of the site. Now remember, this is not really a website. It is still going to be, the URL is going to be site.google.com/a/apps.losrios.edu/ and then whatever name you pick. So it's going to be a pretty long URL. Okay. On the other hand, if you just need to refer to it in your application and the end user doesn't have to type it in, it's not a big deal. So I'm going to do this here and just use the FT Scorer as my site name, which is the default, and click create. So it's pretty easy, you just create a website. And this is not a website design class, so I'm not going to tell you anything about how to properly structure your website and also all the design elements and whatnot. My focus is, can you refer to content of this website from your application so that your splash screen or an instruction screen can refer to it, like a help screen can refer to an HTML document that you're creating here. So I'm going to create a new document, a new page, and I'll just say, this is my splash screen here. And we put page under home and click create. The other thing I want to make sure after we make the splash screen here, okay, this is just the title, okay, so I don't want to use splash screen as a title, so I'm going to use the name of the product, which is Field Target Scorer, as the title of the page, and a very brief description here. I have no idea. Oh, okay, there we go. So we do have full editing ability here. So when you look at the top row, we have all the toolbars of Google Doc. Well, not exactly Google Doc, but it does have most of the elements that you can use in Google Documents. But I'm not going to make it very complicated. You can even insert diagrams and whatnot. So we'll go ahead and just say, this is an app to help you keep score in a field target match. So I'm just going to make it very simple, and then click save, and now we have a fairly simple web page here. What I do want to do is to make sure that this is easy to view with a mobile device, with a smaller device. And last time we did this already, I think it's under manage site. And scroll all the way down because it's not obvious. It's mobile right here. So you want to click automatically adjust site to mobile phones. So this way, it basically what it does is it generates the necessary JavaScript code, and also the necessary CSS, cascading style sheet, just so that this page would look right whether you're on a desktop or on a smaller mobile device. So make sure you click that one, click save, and now all I need is really the URL to the page that I'm dealing with. So I'm going to go back to this part here, go to the quote-unquote splash page, and copy this URL here. And then I go back to App Inventor, and what you need on the splash page, if this is what you want to display, is to click, drag and drop a web viewer. Now, a web viewer is different from a web component. A web viewer, as the name implies, is for displaying content from the web or anything that you can refer to using a URL. A web component, on the other hand, is a hidden component where your program can go through that component to make requests to a website. So one is really only useful for rendering. This one is only useful for rendering. but the other one is useful for your program to make requests to other websites. So make sure that you can differentiate between these two different types of components. So right now this is the screen, and the home URL is going to have the URL of the page that I just talked about. Okay. Follow links, you don't need to turn that on, just so I can turn off that part here. Users location, that's not important because my page does not make use of location. Visible, width, and height, those are all automatic. So we'll go ahead and test this out with only automatic height and see how it displays on the splash screen. So we'll go ahead and start up the emulator. So when this is all done, the next challenge is, what if on the splash screen you want to display some sort of animation instead of just a static page? One thing you can always do is to include the animation on the web page that you refer to. That's one way to do it. The other thing that you might be able to do is to refer to a YouTube video URL and see whether it shows up correctly on your application. So we'll give that a try also after this. I think if you look at the automatic captioning of today's lecture, it's going to be quite funny. Professor Lestrange had me really scared last week. For those of you who don't know, Professor Lestrange is like a 4'1", 4'2", 6 foot, 6'1", 6'2", ex-Marine, tough guy, and he said, oh, it was painful, with the gum surgery thing. So I'm thinking, no, this is not going to be good for me. And as it turned out, it wasn't too bad. Okay, so it has already started, and we don't see the component here. So instead of using automatic, I'm going to make the width field the parent and force the height to be a certain number of pixels. We'll just pick 300, so it looks kind of right here. And go back to the emulator, and it's not showing the website. So you know what? I think it's because of the HTTPS, or I may not have. Okay, this is something that I should do first, is to look at this web page, but from another browser that has not signed into, because it may not be viewable. Okay, let's click share. That's it. Because right now it's only accessible to me, and the emulator is not running, as me, with the apps.losrios.edu authentication. So I need to change this to public on the web, so that everyone, on the web can see it, or I can change it to anyone with the link, that will work sufficiently as well, because the application actually has a link to it also. So this way, any spider won't be able to crawl and find this page. Not that there's anything really important there. Okay, so now that we have made the changes, let's go back to the application. It's not forcing it to start because it is, as far as the app is concerned, there has been no change. So what I'll do is I'm going back to the app here and just force some changes. Okay, let's go back to height and change it to 301 pixels. So that's one change, and it has to repropagate a change to the target. So let's see if the emulator is updating. Nope, doesn't want to do it. Let's see. We can always make the screen respond to something to refresh the web viewer. Let's see whether we can do that. So what we'll do is we're going to, I know what to do. We can just go ahead and make the button with a long click, it will refresh the web viewer. So with the long click of the button, we will do something about the web viewer. Go home, loads the home URL. This happens automatically when the home URL is changed. Forward, back. I need to make it update itself. Okay, that's fine. We'll go ahead and re-specify the URL here. And has already updated. Cool. Yep. So that's one way you can basically, create fairly long documents if you want to, and make it display on your splash screen. Now, the size of it, how much is really actually contained completely without any scrolling, that is something that you have to experiment with, because obviously it depends on a lot of different factors. And this is not scrollable. Maybe there's a switch here. Nope, there's no switch. So you have to kind of design it so that it does not need any scrolling. So but you get the idea. Okay, you get the basic idea of how to include content that is on the web as a splash page. Now, the downside of doing it this way is if your application does not have internet access, this won't show up. Okay, basically it has to pull that from the internet. The alternative is to package an HTML document in your application so that you can use a file URL to refer to the HTML document and also the bitmaps and whatnot that is actually included in the application. App Inventor does not seem to have a way to do it. You can upload file, but these are media files. I'm not sure whether HTML files is something that you can actually upload. If you can't upload it, then you have to have a way to refer to the home URL, which is a files resource.
I tried. It doesn't work with HTML.
It does not work? Okay. All right. So there we go. So the next thing we want to do is to say, okay, but what if I want a video instead of a web page to show up here? Now, so what we'll do is we'll go to let's say YouTube here and find a field target video that might be something that is related to what we are doing here. Okay, so this is full HD. I don't need anything that's really high resolution. I'll pick this one. They're all HD these days, so it's pretty hard to find one that is not HD. Okay. So we'll pick this one and get the URL. So let's see, share, and here's the URL here, copy. And so the first thing I'll do is to just copy and paste this into the web viewer, because that's the laziest way of doing things. And if it works, then it's good, right? So we'll go ahead and change it here to the YouTube URL, and go back to the emulator. I'm not sure whether it's just slow or whether it can actually display your video content or not. It doesn't look like it wants to.
Try the other URL.
Huh?
Go back to the video. Grab the one in the address bar at the top.
Oh, this one?
Yeah.
The full URL?
Yeah.
Why would that make any difference?
Sometimes it can.
Okay. Alright. It might also take time for the app to. Okay, it's responding, but it's not showing the content. Okay, but the video file is definitely a media file, so maybe we can upload a media file to that. I don't have the necessary tools to download a video file here into a Flash file. Let's see. So click on share again, embed email, get video URL. Maybe that'll work. Okay, so I'm gonna get the video URL, copy, and go to terminal and say wget. Paste the URL here. Nope, that won't work.
You need a tool called YouTube-DL. That will work.
Say again?
YouTube-DL.
YouTube-DL. Here?
No. You need it. There's a tool like wget.
Oh, okay.
It's called YouTube-DL. That works.
Okay. I just need a quick video of.
Oh wait, I got it working. Figured it out.
Okay.
Go back to the designer. And it just needed a minute to refresh. Seem to work. Oh, you have follow links unchecked. That's the only thing different.
Oh, okay, maybe that's
That might have been it.
Yeah.
So I got this one up. I don't know why that one worked.
There we go. All right. Now, depending on the URL, you can make it autoplay. If I remember correctly, there are certain parameters you can pass to the URL to make YouTube do all sorts of fun stuff. Like autoplay is one of the options. It basically has to do with what you supply after the URL itself. You can specify. We can just take a quick check here. Okay, autoplay YouTube parameter. There we go. Autoplay is just one of them. All right, so we'll go back to the application and specify that also. How do you separate parameters in a URL? Is it a semicolon? Ampersand, I think.
Yeah. Ampersand.
Yeah. So we'll give that a try. Go back here. It's refreshing. Nope, it's not autoplay. But you'll probably be able to find out exactly what to do. Well, you can also experiment here too. Ampersand autoplay. Refresh it. So this one seems to start automatically, and without the autoplay, it starts automatically too. So I'm not quite sure, whether what is going to make that difference. Okay. Well, you guys can figure it out after the fact, but it is possible. Okay, if I can display it here, and maybe the player is missing altogether on the emulator. So that's a distinct possibility. Is the emulator does not have the video player itself, and so it doesn't matter what I do, it's not going to work. Now with your own mobile device, if you can play YouTube and other video content on your mobile device already, that should not be an issue. Okay. So all right, so that's kind of cool because this gives you all kinds of possibilities of what to include on the splash page. It can be something as simple as just a text label, a logo of some kind, or you can include a short animation. I wouldn't make it too long, maybe 2 or 3 seconds would be good. But you also do not have to package it with your application. Assuming the mobile app always has internet access, now it opens up all sorts of possibility because you can update the URL or the page that it refers to as frequently as you want to. And it will still give the end user a fresh look, like, oh, okay, this is new. This is something that was not the same as the last time I started the application, without having to reinstall anything. Now, this is particularly useful if you want to include instructional stuff. Okay, for instance, like for this particular application, field target, scorer. Maybe at some point I want to include a link like tips for field target, competition. Okay, what to do, techniques, and stuff like that. And putting the video content on YouTube and be able to refer to that content from the application means the end user would be able to look up all those videos while it's not actually a part of the application. Yep, go ahead.
And to say nothing of endorsements from famous shooters who are using your ad.
Yeah, that will work as well. So this really gives you a lot of possibilities. Okay, and you can definitely kind of explore this and find out what is the best way to include a splash page on your particular application. All right, so those were all really good questions. I got these questions right before the class, so it's good to know.
Can you publish this, please?
Yeah, yep. After the yeah, and it's all done. Okay, so last time we were already dealing with this page here, and this particular page, when you look at the emulator, looks like this. Okay, it takes time to update it. So what we need is to have a label to show me the lane number, because that's the detail that I need to know about a particular entry in the log. Is I need to know the lane number, the target, which is either the near or the far target, the estimated distance, which I use a slider to control, and also the only thing that is really important is whether it's a hit or a miss, whether the target fell or not. Okay, and I intentionally put something in between here, so when you look at the actual design, it has a bitmap, and I make the bitmap exactly 200 pixels tall to space it out so that the save button is all the way down here, so people won't be clicking the save button when they only intend to select or deselect the hit checkbox. Okay, so this is where we were last time, and obviously if you want to make your application kind of more fancy, you can redesign the background image. Each screen can have its own background image. If you click on the screen itself, you can see that there's a background image here, so you can specify a particular background image for a screen. For something like this, which is supposed to be like just functional, I would not make it too fancy. I would just make it functional and just stop. Okay. All right. So the big question from last time was, how do I get the configuration? Because in order to, okay, let me go back to the emulator first, because that way we can see it. Because I want, if I slide this bar here, I want the distance here to kind of get updated to reflect the actual distance. And last time we also kind of talked about how to use millimeter as the internal unit, so that internally it will only store distance in number of millimeters, but when it displays it, it will go through a conversion factor, so we can convert it to yards or meters. Okay, do you guys still remember that part? Okay, so what we'll do today is to continue from that point and say, okay, first of all, how do we get the configuration back? And two, once we get the configuration back, how do we make this update this distance over here? And also, we'll leave the actual lane number and the target until a little bit later, because that also needs to be communicated to this particular screen. So the question now is, how are we going to get all this information in? Okay, let's go to blocks here. When we get to blocks, we still have serialized JSON, which gives us the ability to turn a list into just a regular text string, so we can store that into a file, or we can transmit it, we can do whatever we want, because at that point it is just a text string. We have the additional procedure here for to update a particular value in a key value pair list. Okay, this is something we actually spent quite a bit of time on last time. And then we have the configuration string here. Okay, so let's take a quick look here. Config is a global variable. It is initialized to an empty list by default. And we also have a global variable containing just a string of config, C-O-N-F-I-G. And the point of using this global variable string is whenever I initialize the screen, I want to set the config, global variable config as a list to whatever I can retrieve from TinyDB. Whether you want to do this through TinyDB or whether you want to do it through the start value, it's kind of up to you. Going through TinyDB to do it is easier because you don't need to set up another screen to start the screen up with the proper values. Okay, but eventually you have to deal with that anyway, because the start value is what is going to determine the lane number and also which target, the near target or the far target. Okay, but we are not really that concerned about that part yet. Okay, so right now we're just kind of focusing on the slider bar here and basically say, how do we do the conversion? So assuming we have the configuration already loaded, what we'll do is we're going to say, oh, okay, so when the screen is initialized, we want to call this procedure to initialize the screen. So we'll go ahead and go to procedures and call the procedure initialize screen from here. Now this gives me the ability to trigger the same mechanism from elsewhere. Okay, in case initialize is not triggering, like when we're debugging this application, I can actually make some other things to trigger the reinitialization of everything. Are there any questions at this point? Nope. Okay. All right. So in the initialize screen thing, I also have a few things to do. What if the config is empty? In other words, what if TinyDB has nothing stored yet, which is the default configuration, the default condition when an application is first installed? So I need to default the units to something. So what I'll do now is I'm going to go through some initialization here and basically say, if I do not yet have a distance measuring unit, now I'm going to initialize that. Okay. Every time I specify a key, I'm going to go through the same procedure here and use a global string to represent the key of that particular entry in the configuration. So I'm going to go here and say initialize another global variable, and this time I'll say distance unit string, and then initialize it to just distance unit. So now I can revert to this one and say, okay, what kind of measuring units are we dealing with here? And so I would call another procedure called update KV list. Now with update KV list, it always returns a particular value, which means I need something to consume that value, even if that return value is not important to me. There are many ways to consume that particular value. You can always use a junk variable and just store that into a junk variable. That works too. I think that's what we talked about last time. And if you go through logic, there's no easy way to chuck it because every single one of these also return a value. So we cannot use any one of these to chuck their value away. When you look at variables, we can always use a global variable or a local variable and just kind of chuck it. I would prefer to use a local variable for this purpose because if you use a global variable, you might accidentally change something that somebody else needs to work on. Okay, so that's not a good idea. So always use a local variable, and I'll just call this trash can because that's what it is. Okay, it's just a trash can here. And we don't need to necessarily initialize to something, but if you don't, it gives you a warning, so it's always a good thing to give it something to begin with. All right, so at this point, what I want to do is to use the trash can because the return value is not important to me, but I do want to call the procedure called update KV list. And that KV list is my configuration, so I'm going to say update my global configuration, and the key that I'm going to specify would be distance unit. So I'm starting to make something in or create a configuration in the configuration list here. So this one becomes another get, and it is my distance unit string. The new value is basically saying, okay, if it is already found, what do we want it to become as a new value? Or if it does not exist, what is going to be the actual value when we're creating this particular key value pair? So the new value is a default. Okay. So the question now is, should I initialize the distance unit to yards or meters? If the application is mostly used in the United States, probably using yards, right? If it's mostly used elsewhere, okay, Asia or Europe for particularly, you probably want to turn it into meters. Now there are ways you can find out the localization settings of your mobile device and use that to help you automatically determine what makes sense as the default unit. Well, I'm not going to go through that today, so we'll just go ahead and specify yards here. So we'll go ahead and pull a string, and oh, maybe not this, okay? Because we want to use the same approach here to initialize our global variables. So I set another global variable. Oops, not set. To make a global one. So we initialize global, and we'll just call this yard str or yard string, which just spells out yards or yard. Okay. You can use yards or yards if you depending on how you want to do it. Yards probably makes more sense, because when it reflects the number, it will also report the number yards. So just say yards here. There we go. All right. So we'll use that to initialize as the new value, as the default value. Now to overwrite, you have to be careful with this one, because we do not want to overwrite. In other words, if the configuration already has a distant unit, we want to keep it the same. Okay, we don't want to overwrite it. This is basically saying if it does not have a distance unit yet, we want to initialize a default one to yards. Are we doing okay so far with the structure of the code? Okay. All right. So now that we have the unit called yards, okay, and we make sure that unit is here already, the next question is the conversion factor. In other words, if I know the conversion is to yards, do I want to store the number of millimeters in a yard as a part of the configuration file, or do I want to just store it as a conversion factor in the program itself? So that part is kind of a toss-up, okay? Because once you know it is yards, the conversion factor is basically a constant. So there really is no need to store it in the configuration. The configuration file only has to indicate, are we dealing with meters or are we dealing with yards? Once we know it is yards, we can then do the conversion factor here locally and just specify a constant for the conversion factor. Okay. All right. So now that we know it is dealing with yards, we can now actually start to play with the slider. Okay. Now the slider, has one extreme which is always all the way down here, and then the other extreme which is all the way up there. In a field target competition, the closest target is 10 yards and the furthest target is 55 yards. That is basically by regulation. So you can use just use a 10 to 55 yards, or you can give it a little room, because sometimes when people organize these field target competitions, they want to have fun and actually extend it to like 65 yards, just to see how poorly people will do when they shoot at 65 yards, or they might place a target that is closer at maybe 5 yards or so. So you can actually leave some leeway here and just say, okay, the closest one is not exactly 10 yards, it is 5 yards, and the furthest one is 60 or 65 yards instead. Okay. When you design the application, now the question is, what are you going to do with your application? Okay, so let's switch back to the screen design here. All right. There are two ways to do this. The question now is, how do we specify the max value and the min value here? If I do it one way, I'm going to say, we'll use the actual units of measurement here. So from 5 to 60, we can programmatically do this in the application during the initialization. So we can set the minimum value and the maximum value while we load the configuration file. So we can actually do the conversion at that time. But the second approach is to fix this to always measure in millimeters. So the slider only returns a value in millimeters, and we have to do the conversion from millimeters to whatever unit we want to display as a part of your own code. So that really is kind of the question, is do you want to fix the slider so that it reflects the actual unit that is going to be displayed, so that you can use App Inventor's own conversion factor to handle all the conversion? Or do you want to use only use millimeters and use your own logic as someone slides the slider and display the actual unit? That really is the question. It's a matter of efficiency. Which one do you think is more efficient? Doing the conversion with your own code, or let App Inventor do the conversion?
Let App Inventor do the conversion.
Let an App Inventor do the conversion is the more efficient way. you're absolutely right. Because even if you specify in millimeters here, okay, so let's just say, okay, let's do some quick calculations here. Okay, so 5 yards is this many, excuse me, inches, and once I have inches, I can convert it into millimeters. So we're dealing with about 4,600 millimeters here. So if you specify 4,600 here, and we'll do the other math here. So if we have 60 yards, each yard has 36 inches, and each inch has 25.4 millimeters. So the other number is going to be, let's call it 55,000 here. Okay. So if you specify these two min and max value, guess what? Every time you slide the slider bar, App Inventor is already doing some sort of math. Okay, because it still has to convert the slider position into a value between min and max value. So the conversion is happening anyway. So you might as well use that to reflect the actual conversion converted value, right? And once we have that, when we save, then we convert it back into millimeters to save it into the log. Okay, so I know it sounds like a roundabout way of doing things, but this is actually more efficient because you don't have to go through 2 calculations in just one. Okay, so now we go back to the blocks here, because every time we update, every time we load from the configuration, we'll also do the conversion and configure the slider bar accordingly in this code here. Are we doing okay so far with this? Okay. Okay, here's another thing that we want to, another question, okay? Should we use a global variable, like one of these, to indicate the measuring unit? Or should we only use the configuration list to maintain the measuring unit, the distance unit? That's the question, okay? Let me make this kind of more obvious. Okay, so we'll put in the logic here, and we'll use an if-then block, and we'll put an else here. Okay, so we did an else to catch everything else. So we'll basically have to say, if the measuring unit, if the distance unit is in fact yard, then we'll configure the slider bar this way. Okay, this is what we are dealing with here. All right, so the first part seems to be pretty easy. It's a string comparison for equality, and what we're comparing is the global variable for the word yard and the configuration stored in config already, because we know it has to be there already, because we just updated the KV list to make sure that we do have a distance unit. So since we know it has to be there already, we can just use the lists here, use the last item, which is lookup in pairs. The key in this case is the same as my yard string. So we duplicate this, put it into keys. The list that contains the pairs is my config global variable. So we duplicate another get here. And since we pretty much know it has to be found, we really don't need to specify what is not found. But if we don't specify it, it gives us a warning, which is not a good thing. So we'll just go ahead and say, okay, if it is not found, we'll give it an empty string. That's all we need. There we go. All right. So if it is yards, then we'll go ahead and configure the slider bar, using the numbers that we just saw. Okay. So in this case, we'll specify, go to the slider, and we'll set the minimum and the maximum and the minimum value accordingly. So we'll say set slider minimum to, duplicate this block, and the other one to set the maximum. There we go. Okay. All right. So now we have another thing to determine. Do we want to use the hard constant of 5 to 60 yards, as the limit, or do we want to make it also configurable using the configuration, setting? What do you think? It depends on how often, whether people actually have to do that or not. Okay, if you make it, a part of the configuration, it is more flexible. Your application is now far more flexible than than without that option. But it also makes it slightly more complicated. Okay, so it depends on how fast you want to push the application out. Because if I have until next March to push this application out, I have quite a bit of time. Okay, I can actually afford the flexibility by increasing the complexity a little bit. On the other hand, if I do not, okay, then maybe I want to fix it as a constant. Is that making any sense? Okay, so if it's making sense, then even if I make it a constant, I don't want to plug in a number here. Okay, I don't want to just plug in 5 and 55 here, because that means I have to do my own conversion, and if the unit turns out to be meter, I have to recalculate what is the equivalence of 5 yards in meters and what is the equivalence of 55 yards in meters. So what I'll do instead is to use 2 global variables. So I'm going to use another global variable here, and this time it is basically saying close distance, and I'm going to measure in millimeters. So I'm going to suffix my variable here with mm, to basically say that this is distance measured in millimeters. And I'll use my calculator and just figure out what is 5 yards. We just did, but I forgot. So we'll go ahead and do the calculation again. And it's exactly 4572. So we'll go ahead and specify that as number, which is 4572. And we'll do the same thing with the far distance. Oops. Far distance in terms of millimeter, and use my calculator to basically look. Let's use 60 yards in this case. 60 yards, 36 inches to a yard, and 25.4 millimeters to 1 inch. So we have this number, copy, paste, and we are done. So with these 2 numbers already in millimeters, now I can basically do the conversion here. But once again, we have to figure out what is the conversion factor. That's really up to you. Okay, do you want to make the conversion factor another global variable, or just kind of hard code it here? I'm just going to hard code it here for now, okay, because I can fix that later. So we'll go ahead and specify a division here, and the division is going to specify, the first one is going to be my global variable. This is the min value, so this is going to be the close distance in millimeters. Then I have to specify the number of millimeters per yard here. So we'll go ahead and calculate that. It's 36 inches. Oops. All right, one more time. 36 inches in 1 yard and 25.4 millimeters per inch. So we have 914.4. So we copy this, we make the constant over here, and just paste it here. Okay, and we can just replicate this block. Oops, yeah, drag the other one. There we go, and deal with the far distance here. Okay. So you can probably imagine there will be other places with this constant 914.4, and it may not be a bad idea to make another global variable for the conversion factor, just so that I don't mistype it somewhere else. Okay, so we'll go ahead and make another one, make another global variable, and we'll call this one, basically it's millimeters per yard. We'll just go ahead and drag this one over here. Then we don't need to use the constants anymore. Instead of using the constants, we'll use the global variable. So we'll go here and say get. Does everybody see why how I'm trying to improve my program so it is manageable as it gets more and more complex. So there's no no programmer, as much as they claim that they can to make the program flexible, easy to read, and easy to maintain from day one, from the first line all the way to the last. Okay, so the point is, can you make adjustments and spend the time to make the adjustments as you write the code to make your program more maintainable, or do you want to just kind of stack more and more code on top of each other and quote unquote save time because I don't have time to do any reorganization? That really is the question. When you become when you work for a company, sometimes you don't have that option. Okay. How many people have already kind of worked as a programmer or a developer for a company? Okay, and sometimes do you have directives from your boss and say, don't waste time on something that does not need to be fixed.
What you said is absolutely real world.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Because I get it all the time too. When I was in industry, I was working for I was working in a small company, which is already better than a large company, and the directive given to me was, don't fix anything that is not broken. But the program was written in a really, really poor way. It used a lot of global variables, not as constants. Okay, using variables as using global variables for constants is one of the few reasons why your global variables should be used. Okay, but it was using a lot of global variables as a communication way from one point to another point. It has subroutines in C and C++ in the order of hundreds of lines. So it won't fit on one page when you display it on the screen. It will take like 10 page up and page downs to get from one end to the other end. And the worst part, absolute worst part, is it is not structured. There were go-tos and labels all over the place, and it would go from inside a nested conditional statement, inside a nested loop, inside a nested something else, to another place that is also nested a few levels down. Now, if you don't understand what I'm talking about, I'll just say that it looks like a bowl of spaghetti, okay? Which is bad when it comes to coding. And I mean cooked spaghetti, not spaghetti strings before they cook. Those are fairly straight and easy to follow, okay? And I had a tendency to fix things, when it doesn't look right to me. And my boss kept saying, don't waste your time. If it's not broken, don't fix it.
Define broken. Is it define broken then?
Yeah, exactly. Define broken. And his definition is definitely different from mine.
Yeah.
So I had to, but I'm a relatively fast developer, so I was able to finish my own actual assignment usually pretty quickly. Then I just use the rest of the time fix up the program. Not to be sneaky, but I cannot stand your programs that are kind of like written in a poor way. Okay. I'm not gonna leave, I will leave the else part here just empty for now because I'm just dealing with yards. And I want to know whether it works or not, okay? All right, let's check it. Oh, it just crashed. Again. All right, reset connection. All right, so while we're waiting for the emulator to restart, I can tell you right away, it's not gonna work. Okay, the number is not gonna show because I did not make that link. Okay, so people can move the slider all day long, it will still be initialized correctly, but it won't do a single thing because I don't have any code to link updates to the slider bar to the number that is above it, the text label that is above it. So we'll have to fix that. Well, we have to wait until the emulator is up to do that. And when this is all done, we also have to save the configuration, because if we don't save the configuration, it will still be uninitialized the next time we start the application. So we do need a time to save the configuration. And we'll talk about when is a good time to do it. All right, so we do have the page up and running. Just a few seconds. All right, so So right now, it seems to be working, but it's not, because you don't see the distance getting updated. So what we'll do is we'll go back to the blocks and say, okay, when the slider is updated, we better do something about the text label too. And that means we have to go to the slider block here and say when slider gauged distance is updated, position changed, we'll use the thumb position, which is already measured in whatever distance unit we want to report on the screen. So that makes it easy, right? Because all we need to do now is to update the distance label, and we can say set distance label distance dot text to. For now, I'm just going to set it to thumb position. Okay, we'll just test it to see if it works. If it does work, then we'll refine it. Okay, there's one little thing that I need to refine. All right, so it's not working. It's measuring in millimeters. That's because this code did not execute. Okay, this code did not execute, which means this block did not execute. So that it can be one of several reasons. Maybe initialize screen is not called. Okay, so when screen3.initialize, this is never called. So we'll go ahead for debugging purposes only. We need a way to debug that. So we'll go ahead and let's see. Initialize orientation change. There's nothing we can do here. But I don't want to use any of these as a trigger. So we'll go ahead and use something else. The label has no event. I'm gonna use this. It's not a very good idea, but it's a quick way to do it. Okay, I'm gonna borrow the button, the save button, a long click on the save button is going to reload and initialize the screen. I'm just gonna borrow that for now. Okay, so we'll go ahead and long click this, and it's still not doing it. All right. So something is not right with the logic of initialize screen. It is not configuring the distance unit, and that's why the distance unit is not in yards. It is still using millimeters. Okay, so here's the debug technique. We know that these two lines of code is not executed. Otherwise, we would Otherwise, we would not be measuring in millimeters. Okay, so it's still measuring in millimeters. This fails because this condition is not true. Now, this condition is not true because global yard string, which is saying yards, is not matching. Oh, okay, I made a mistake here. I should be using the key of distance unit string and not using yard string. Okay, my mistake. So bug located and fixed. Okay, but did you guys see how I use a step-by-step approach? Because the first thing is I notice which block is not executed when it's supposed to. So I say, okay, how can I not reach these two lines of code or these two blocks of code? It's inside the conditional statement. So the condition of the conditional statement must be false if it is reachable. So how can that be false? So I check the comparison on one side. Okay, that seems right. The other side, okay, I was using the wrong string as the key of the key value pair. Okay, so now that we got that fixed, we'll go back to the emulator. Long press the save button to reinitialize everything. You can see it's already updating itself. So now it is all measuring in yards, 5 yards, all the way up to approximately 60 yards. Okay, so that part is working. Are we doing okay so far with this? Okay, so remember I said there's one refinement that I want to make to it, because it's just saying 41.3, but 41.3 of what, right? That's an easy one to fix, because what we need is to change the string so that instead of just setting it to the thumb position itself, which is the number, I can now report the units. And to do that, we need a join block here. The first one is going to be the number. Yeah, it's going to complain, but we'll fix that later. And then the second part, okay, we need one more thing in between. The one thing in between is going to be just an empty space. It won't let me do it. Okay, we just go to text, put this block here, and then put a single space character here. Because without a single space character, the number, the digits, and yards will be kind of right next to each other, which doesn't read right, okay? So I'm going to put a space in between. And then what we have here, down here, now this is, the other thing is, we now need to refer to this chunk here. So, okay, so here's something that I'm doing, and you need to kind of think about it. Right click, duplicate, and paste it here. All right. What did I just do? Copy and paste. Okay. Whenever you're writing programs, not only in App Inventor 2, but every time you write any program in Visual Basic, in C, C++, Java, PHP, doesn't matter what programming language you're dealing with, every time you copy and paste a block of code, you have to think, is there a better way to do it? Okay? So you might say, oh, what is a better way to do this? I mean, we do have to refer to config, and we do have to retrieve the actual unit, a distance measuring unit. So what else are we going to, how else are we going to do that? That is the question. Go ahead. Subroutine, very good. Okay, so we can actually use a subroutine to make this, like, okay, we just call this subroutine and it has that. So we go to subroutine here, and then we say, this subroutine is going to have a result, okay, because we have to be able to plug it in to this slot here. So we're going to say get distance unit. Drag and drop. So now that we have get distance unit as a subroutine, every time I need to refer to the distance unit, I just need a call to that subroutine. Get distance unit. Put it here. Remember the other block where I copied from? I can do the same thing now here. So are you sure to delete for? Yes. And then we refer to procedures and then just say call get distance unit. Okay? It does the same thing, but it's one is cleaner, and two, it doesn't clutter up the rest of the program. So it just makes more sense to do it like this. Now the other thing that you can also do is the conversion between millimeters and yards. Okay, you can turn it into a subroutine as well. Okay, so we'll do that when it's time. But right now, the program is easier to read, and hopefully the output of the text label is also easier to understand. So we go to the emulator, and we give it a try. So you can see how it is now measuring in yards. It's telling you that this is, you're entering a value of 20.4 yards. So are there any questions about this program at this point? No questions? This is all good so far? All right. The checkbox, there's really nothing to say about the checkbox. It's either checked or not, okay? Now whether it's checked or not, it's not going to trigger a lot of operation or any operation whatsoever. If you want to, there is one thing you can do. I can use a big old bitmap of a circle and a cross, because by convention, if it's a hit, it's supposed to mark as a cross on a piece of paper. If it's a miss, it's supposed to mark as a big circle on a piece of paper. So if I want to make this application really, really foolproof for people who are used to the paper way of doing things, I can put a big old bitmap here, right here. Okay. So when the checkbox is marked, it displays a cross, and otherwise it displays a circle. So this way, people who are used to the paper way of doing things cannot, misunderstand. Okay, should I check or uncheck? Because now it is corresponding to the good old conventional way of doing things on paper. I'm not going to do it now, because it's not going to be a big feature. We can always put it on a wish list. Okay, if I do it now, it becomes what we call that again. Feature creep. Okay, I'm just creeping and say, oh, I can do this, I can do that. Yes, I can. The question is, do I want to do it now? Okay. Now the other thing about feature creep versus feature leap is from the commercial perspective, okay, if you are doing this for a living, okay, why do you want to do a feature leap instead of a feature creep? Two reasons. One is the release date. If you do not stop feature creep, you'll be creeping more and more and more and pushing the release date to be further and further and further away. So that will give your competitors a way to release their product before you have a chance to release yours. And yes, yours is going to have a lot of new features because of all the creeping, but if you lose market share because you are not releasing your product early enough, it doesn't matter how many features you have or how superior your app is. Just remember VHS versus beta. Okay, some of you are way too young to know what is VHS and what is beta. Tape. Ew, what is tape? Even CDs or DVDs is like, ew, what is DVD? I just want my Netflix streamed to me, right? Yeah. Yeah, but the point is, superior products, they may not get the market share because of many other reasons. Now, let's talk about feature leap, okay? Because if you're not creeping, then what do you do with all these bright ideas and go like, oh, this would be a great idea? Don't do it. Keep it on the list. Okay, remember last time you keep track of one wish list and one to-do list. Wish list means, oh, this is going to be hard to do. I have to really kind of think about how to do it. To-do list means, oh, this is going to be an easy one, okay, but I don't want to do it now. So that will give you two advantages. One is the early release date of something that is at least functional, okay? It works, okay? It is stable, it works, and it's out there, okay? And the second thing is, by the time you release the first one, which you think, oh, I could have done better, there are all of these things that I could have done, by the time you release it, you have a whole list of things that you can do to enhance the product and get ready for the next version. Okay, is that making any sense? So that means, even if your competitor is releasing something with more features than yours, if you get to the market first, you get the market share. And later on, you can release a second version, and now you can tout all of these new features, right? And say, look at the new version. I have all of these enhancements. So that's why, instead of doing a feature creep, it's much better to make a leap and just combine all of those to-do items into the next version or the next release of your software. All right, so I'm kind of done here. It's time to deal with the save button here, okay? So the question now is, what am I saving? What do you think? Remember, this is a component screen of an application that has multiple screens. So this is not the screen that should actually do the saving. This screen should only report back to whatever screen started and say, okay, here's the entry, okay? This is the estimated distance, this is the hit or the miss, and that's it. That's all that I know, okay? So instead of saving it to the TinyDB already, because even though you can display the lane number and the target number, it's not you're not going to save it. Okay, somebody else can make the decision and say, okay, this is how I want to save it. Do you guys still remember the structure of a match? More or less. Okay, a match has the competitor ID. It has the location. It has potentially a picture of the location itself, and then each match has a certain number of lanes, and each lane has a certain number of targets, and then each target has two distances. Oh, excuse me, I take it back. Each lane has two targets, and each target has a different distance. And you have two tries on each target too. And we are only talking about one single try on one single target here. It's not time to save anything yet onto TinyDB or into a file, because this is a very tiny little component of one single match. Okay, it's not time to save it yet. And besides, I don't even know where I'm supposed to save this. Am I going to save this into a TinyDB, or am I going to save it into a file? I don't know yet, okay? Because I'm really all the way down here as a low-level type of screen. So the save button should not actually save anything other than the default unit of measuring distance, okay? So we'll go ahead and go to the save button. So now we can specify what the save button is going to do. So when the save button is clicked, we're going to save the configuration. Now the configuration at this point is a list, so we want to use it, we want to store it back into the TinyDB. So what I'll do is I'm going to go to the initialization block, and it is right here. So I'm going to duplicate this block, and this time, I know what you're thinking, I'm copying and pasting, but that's not actually what I'm doing. What I'm doing here is to reverse this operation. In other words, I'm not loading the configuration from TinyDB, I'm trying to save it into TinyDB, okay? But I'm using this as a reference so that I can drag and drop the key name and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do now is to go to TinyDB1, and this time I'm going to store. So I'm going to store a value. The tag is going to be the same as this one, so I'm going to copy and paste, not copy, just move it, okay? And the configuration is stored in my global variable config. This part I can now toss away. And I'll put this one here. Oops. Okay, we have to use a get block instead of a set block. There's no way to recycle that. All right, but it is config, not config string. So gotta make sure that is the case. So the first thing the save button is gonna do is to save the configuration. Now it is a good idea to save the configuration now because we just made use of the measuring unit of yards. So we should probably save it. What else am I going to do? Well, remember, another screen probably started this particular screen. So I'm going to reply to the other screen with the result of this particular screen. So I'm going to use, under control, I'm going to use close screen with value. Okay. And the result is going to be a list. Okay, because I do have multiple things to report back. The first thing I need to report back would be, the most important one is, was it a hit or a miss? Okay, I need to report back that. I also need to report back the measuring unit, okay, the distance, okay, the estimated distance. I need to report back a timestamp, okay, what time the end user click the save button. That can be done on the other side too, but I might as well do it here because this is the actual screen responsible for saving the data, or the end user is going to click that here. So what I'll do is I'm going to make a list. So naturally I go under list here and say let's go ahead and create a list, make a list. This is going to be a fairly long list of lists. Okay. All right. So the first item, because it's going to be a key value pair list, the ordering is not important. Okay, that's the nice part of doing that sort of thing. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is to indicate is it a hit or a miss. Okay, so I will make another list of only 2 items here. The first item is going to be the key of indicating it's a hit or a miss. So once again, I want to be consistent. I know it doesn't make sense to have a global variable here, but I'm going to do it. So this is going to be hit string, which is just going to be a text string of hit or not. Okay. And I will refer to this global variable as the key of that particular entry. Okay, what about the second one? It's either true or false. Yep, go ahead. Row sheet, that's right. Let's see if I can find it. Cool. That's the downside of using a microphone.
Google Forms.
Google Forms, yeah. And certain the passcode that I give you guys during class.
Exactly.
I will do that. That sounds like a great idea. Thank you. Turn it into an app.
There you go. It can be done very easily.
Yep. All right. So the next thing we want to do is to record the state of the checkbox. So we go in the checkbox here, and the property checked is either true or false. It's a Boolean, and we can plug it here directly, okay? Because if it is true, it will be a string of TRUE. If it's false, it will actually spell FALSE automatically. So there's no need for me to convert it from Boolean into a string in this case. The second item is going to be another list because everything is going to be a pair. And the second one is going to record the estimated distance, okay? The estimated distance is going to be, I don't think I have a string for that yet, so I'm going to create one too. So initialize another global variable, and we'll call that, let's see, it's gauge distance, not estimated. Same thing, gauge distance string. And you can see I use str as a suffix of all of these strings so that it's easier for myself to distinguish, is it an actual value or is it just a string? So gauged distance. Now I can refer to it as the key. So I get here, and I wish I could just do this, but I cannot. Okay, I cannot just grab the thumb position here because it is already in yards, right? Excuse me. So that's why I cannot just do it here. I have to convert it back into millimeter because the whole purpose is to store everything in millimeters internally, okay? So I can go to math, do a multiplication. One component would be the actual thumb position, and the other one is going to be my global variable called millimeters per yards. There we go. All right. So this will store the distance. Yep.
You should have a procedure. One that goes from millimeters to yards. One that goes.
You
from
can
yards
also
to
make two
millimeters,
procedures to do that.
And then another two for if somebody picks did you say feet or meters?
In meters, right? You can combine it into one single procedure because they can both refer to the configuration, so we know what is the measuring unit and can do the conversion for both. That would be a great idea. But I'm just gonna do one more here since we're still passing the row sheet around. Okay, this is going to be the last item. We have the hit or miss, we have the gauge distance, and we need a timestamp here. Okay. Now to do the timestamp, we have to make sure that the clock component is included here. So I need to go to, I think it's under sensors, and pull a clock into my application. Then I can refer to the current time. So the third one is going to be timestamp. So I'm going to use another string for the key of this item. So we'll call this timestamp, or just time is fine, timestamp string. Whatever you do, just make it consistent. That really is the key, is to make it consistent. So I'm going to make this just timestamp as the text of the key. So I'm going to get the string, stash it here, and then the actual timestamp is going to be in. Okay, I'm just going to get the right one. It's going to be the now of clock 1. It is measured in probably milliseconds since 1970, which is a huge number, but that's all I need. Now you can definitely see that what I store internally is not going to be something people can just look at and go like, oh, okay, it was yesterday or it was a week ago. It's going to be one big huge number, but it's a very universal way to display time. Now the nice thing about that is, if I if I send this information to another person halfway across the world in another time zone using different types of measuring units, that other person can have a configuration and say, this is my time zone, this is my measuring unit, and the data will pop up in the correct way, pretty much quote unquote automatically. So that's why when you store something internally, you kind of have to think about what is the best way to store it internally so that we can do the conversion to different units later on. Okay. We are running out of time today, so I'm going to stop now. But I'm hoping that you guys are still getting something out of this. Just working on this low-level screen. Okay. And I'll see you guys on Wednesday. So keep up on your own application, and I'm going to upload this too.
Yeah.